Have you ever felt like someone was taking advantage of you, using you, manipulating you for their own gain? Maybe it's a boss who keeps changing the rules. Maybe it's a family member who exploits your kindness. Maybe it's someone who promises you one thing but delivers something completely different. Well, let me tell you about a man named Jacob who experienced all of that and more. But here's the twist. Jacob was a master manipulator himself, a deceiver, a schemer, a man who had lied, cheated, and stolen to get what he wanted. And now he was about to meet his match. This is the story of Jacob and Laban, a tale of deception and counter-deception, of love and betrayal, of 14 years of labor for the woman of his dreams, and of how God can work even through the messiest, most dysfunctional family situations to fulfill his purposes. It's a story about reaping what you sow, about transformation through hardship, and about a God who never gives up on broken people. So if you've ever felt cheated, stuck, or wondered if God can really use your messy situation, hit that like button and subscribe right now, because this ancient story has something powerful to say to your life today. To understand the story, we need to know who Jacob was. His name literally meant heel grabber or supplanter, and he lived up to it. Jacob was born grabbing his twin brother Esau's heel, and he'd been grabbing ever since. He had tricked his older brother out of his birthright for a bowl of stew. He had deceived his blind father Isaac, pretending to be Esau to steal the blessing that belonged to his brother. And when Esau found out and threatened to kill him, Jacob had to run for his life. His mother Rebekah told him to flee to her brother Laban in Haran, hundreds of miles away. "Stay with him a while," she said, "until your brother's fury subsides." She thought it would be a few weeks, maybe a few months. She had no idea it would be 20 years. She would never see her beloved son again. So Jacob left everything, his home, his family, his father's wealth, and headed into the unknown. A fugitive, an exile, a man running from the consequences of his own deception. Little did he know, he was running straight into the arms of a man who would outdeceive the deceiver himself. On his journey, something happened that would change Jacob forever. Exhausted and alone, he stopped for the night in the middle of nowhere. He took a stone for a pillow and lay down under the stars. And then he dreamed. He saw a stairway, a ladder reaching from earth to heaven. Angels were ascending and descending on it, and at the top stood the Lord himself. God spoke to him, not with condemnation for what he'd done, but with promise. "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Jacob woke up terrified and amazed. He set up the stone as a pillar, poured oil on it, and called the place Bethel, House of God. He made a vow, "If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, then the Lord will be my God." It was a beginning, not a complete transformation, but a seed planted. God was claiming this deceiver for himself. Jacob continued his journey with renewed hope. Finally, after weeks of travel, he arrived in Haran. He came to a well in a field where shepherds were gathered with their flocks. A large stone covered the mouth of the well. It took multiple shepherds to roll it away. Jacob asked them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said. "And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." And then Jacob saw her, Rachel, beautiful, graceful, walking toward the well with her father's flock. And in that moment, something happened to the scheming, calculating man. He fell in love, deeply, truly, completely in love. The Bible says when Jacob saw Rachel, He was so overwhelmed that he went over and single-handedly rolled the stone away from the well, something that normally took several men. Adrenaline fueled by love, he watered her flock, and then he kissed her and wept aloud. He told her who he was, her father's nephew, and she ran to tell Laban. Finally, Jacob had arrived, and he had found the woman he would love for the rest of his life. When Laban heard the news, he hurried to meet Jacob. He embraced him, kissed him, and brought him to his home. Jacob told him everything that had happened, and Laban said, "You are my own flesh and blood." It sounded warm. It sounded welcoming. But Laban was calculating. He saw opportunity. Here was a strong young man, clearly smitten with his daughter, willing to work. Laban was a businessman, and he knew a good deal when he saw one. After Jacob had stayed with him for a month, working without pay, Laban said, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. Leah, the older one, had weak eyes. The Hebrew suggests she was plain, unremarkable. But Rachel, the younger, was lovely in form and beautiful. And Jacob loved Rachel. So Jacob made his offer. "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." 7 years. That was an enormous bride price, far beyond what was customary. But Jacob didn't care. He would have paid anything for Rachel. Laban's response should have been a warning. "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me."
So Jacob worked for Laban 7 years to get Rachel. And here's what the Bible says. They seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Think about that. 7 years of hard labor, tending sheep in the scorching heat and freezing nights, dealing with difficult animals, sleeping outdoors, all while living under Laban's roof and rules. 7 years that could have felt like a lifetime. But love made them feel like days. Jacob was a changed man in some ways. He couldn't scheme his way to Rachel. He couldn't deceive or manipulate to get her. He had to work. He had to wait. He had to prove himself. And he did it willingly, joyfully, because she was worth it. Every day he saw her. Every day his love grew. Every day brought him closer to the moment when Rachel would finally be his wife. He counted down the days, the months, the years. And finally, the 7 years were complete. When the 7 years were up, Jacob went to Laban and said, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to make love to her." Straightforward, direct. He'd fulfilled his part of the bargain. Now Laban needed to fulfill his. So Laban threw a wedding feast. He brought together all the people of the place for a celebration. There was food, wine, music, dancing. It was everything a wedding should be. Jacob's heart must have been soaring. After 7 long years, Rachel would finally be his. As evening came, it was time for the bride to be brought to the bridegroom. In that culture, the bride would be heavily veiled, her face completely covered. She would be led to the wedding tent in darkness. And there, in the privacy of the night, the marriage would be consummated. Jacob waited in the tent, his heart pounding. 7 years of anticipation coming to this moment. The veiled bride was brought to him. In the darkness he received her. In the darkness they came together as husband and wife. And in the morning when the light came, it was Leah. Can you imagine that moment? The sun rising, Jacob waking up beside his new bride, turning to look at her face, and realizing it's not Rachel, it's Leah. The horror, the shock, the crushing betrayal. 7 years. 7 years he had worked for Rachel, and Laban had given him Leah instead. Jacob went to Laban furious. "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Deceive. That word must have hit Jacob like a thunderbolt, because that's exactly what he had done to his own father. He had deceived Isaac, pretending to be Esau. And now he had been deceived, given Leah instead of Rachel. The deceiver had been deceived. What you sow, you reap. Laban's response was smooth, almost casual. It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week. Then we will give you the younger one also, in return for another 7 years of work. Another 7 years. Laban had just doubled the bride price. He'd gotten 7 years of labor and was about to get 7 more. It was brilliant manipulation. It was ruthless exploitation. And Jacob had no choice. He was in love with Rachel. He would do whatever it took. So Jacob agreed. He finished the bridal week with Leah, 7 days. And then Laban gave him Rachel too. Jacob finally had the woman he loved. But now he also had a wife he never wanted. The Bible makes it painfully clear. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. Think about Leah's position. She was in a marriage where she was the second choice, the unwanted one, the mistake. She knew her husband loved her sister more than her. She went to bed every night knowing she wasn't the one he truly wanted. Must have been agony. But God saw Leah. The Bible says, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah started having children: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. With each birth, she hoped Jacob would love her. With Reuben she said, "Surely my husband will love me now." With Simeon, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved." With Levi, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me." It's heartbreaking. Meanwhile, Rachel, the beloved wife, couldn't have children, and it tormented her. Jacob worked another 7 years for Laban. 14 years total for the woman he loved. Through all of it, Laban prospered. His flocks grew. His wealth increased. And it was largely because of Jacob's skill and hard work. But Laban wasn't grateful. He was greedy. Even after the 14 years were complete, he didn't want to let Jacob go. He needed him too much. Jacob was too valuable. So when Jacob finally said he wanted to leave and return to his own homeland, Laban responded, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." Then he added, "Name your wages and I will pay them." Notice, Laban had learned by divination, pagan fortune-telling, that God was blessing him through Jacob. Even a pagan manipulator could see that God's hand was on Jacob. The Lord was prospering everything Jacob touched, and Laban was reaping the benefits. Jacob had a family now, wives, children, a household, but he had nothing of his own. No wealth, no flocks, no security for his future. After 14 years of labor, he was still dependent on Laban. It was time for that to change. Jacob made a proposal. Instead of wages, he asked for something that seemed small. "Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages." In that time and place, most sheep were white and most goats were dark. Speckled and spotted animals were rare. Jacob was essentially saying, "I'll take the rejects, the unusual ones, the minority. Everything else is yours." Laban must have thought he was getting another great deal. "Agreed," he said. "Let it be as you have said." But Laban couldn't resist one more act of deception. That very day, he removed all the speckled and spotted animals himself and gave them to his sons, putting a 3-day journey between those flocks and Jacob's. He tried to stack the deck, to make it almost impossible for Jacob to prosper. But Laban underestimated 2 things: Jacob's intelligence and God's favor. Jacob began to use selective breeding techniques that were incredibly advanced for his time. He used visual stimulation, strategic breeding, and careful selection to increase the speckled and spotted animals in his care. The stronger animals he bred for himself, the weaker ones for Laban. The results were dramatic. Jacob's flocks grew stronger and larger. Laban's grew weaker. Jacob became exceedingly prosperous. He acquired large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. 4 years this continued. And Laban watched his nephew's wealth grow while his own declined. The man who had exploited Jacob for 14 years was now being outmaneuvered. The deceiver was being outdeceived. But Laban didn't accept it gracefully. He changed Jacob's wages 10 times, constantly moving the goalposts, changing the rules, trying to find a way to keep Jacob down and take what was his. Every time Laban said, "The speckled ones will be your wages," all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. When he changed it to, "The spotted ones will be your wages," all the flocks bore spotted young. It was clear to everyone that God was intervening. No matter how many times Laban cheated, no matter how he manipulated the agreement, Jacob prospered. God was fulfilling his promise made years before at Bethel. "I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go." But success brought new problems. Laban's sons began to mutter, "Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father." They were jealous, bitter, and potentially dangerous. And Laban himself. Jacob could see that his attitude toward him had changed. The man who once welcomed him warmly now looked at him with suspicion and resentment. The situation was becoming hostile. Jacob found himself in a difficult position. He had finally gained wealth and security for his family, but he was surrounded by people who hated him for it. He was prosperous but not safe, blessed but not free. Then the Lord spoke to him, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." It was time to leave Laban, time to return home, time to face Esau, the brother he'd wronged 20 years ago. God was calling him back to complete the circle, to finish what had been left unfinished. But there was a problem. Laban would never let him go willingly. Not with all those flocks, all that wealth. Laban would find a way to stop him, to claim what was Jacob's, to keep him trapped. Jacob would have to make a difficult choice. Jacob called Rachel and Leah out to the field where his flocks were. He needed to talk to them away from Laban's ears. He explained everything. How their father had cheated him, changing his wages 10 times. How God had not allowed Laban to harm him. How God had blessed him despite Laban's deception. "You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength," he said. "Yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me." Then he told them about the dream God had given him, confirming that it was time to leave. "Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land," God had said. Rachel and Leah's response is remarkable. "Do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you." Even Laban's own daughters recognized his greed and deception. They were ready to leave. So Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated. He set out for the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. And Laban didn't know. Jacob fled in secret. 3 days later, Laban found out Jacob had fled. He was furious. He gathered his relatives and pursued Jacob for 7 days, finally catching up with him in the hill country of Gilead. But the night before he reached Jacob, God came to Laban in a dream and warned him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." When Laban caught up with Jacob, he was indignant. "What have you done? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye." It's almost laughable. This is the man who deceived Jacob on his wedding night, who exploited him for 20 years, who changed his wages 10 times. And now he's complaining about being deceived. Jacob's response was powerful. "I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But I've been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. And you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for the 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. Then Jacob said something profound. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. Laban knew Jacob was right. He knew God had intervened, but he still wanted to save face, to maintain some control. So he proposed a covenant. Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. They set up a stone pillar and gathered stones into a heap. They called it Mizpah, meaning watchtower, because Laban said, "May the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other." It was essentially a non-aggression pact. Laban agreed not to pursue Jacob anymore, and Jacob agreed not to mistreat Laban's daughters or return to trouble him. They sacrificed animals, shared a meal, and spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. It was over. Jacob was finally free from Laban. 20 years of manipulation, exploitation, and deception had come to an end. So what can we learn from this incredible story? First, we see the principle of reaping what you sow played out in vivid detail. Jacob was a deceiver, and he was deceived. He tricked his father, and he was tricked on his wedding night. He stole from his brother, and Laban stole from him for 20 years. God's moral law doesn't sleep. What goes around comes around. The seeds we plant, whether good or bad, will eventually bear fruit in our lives. Jacob's deception caught up with him in the form of Laban. But here's the beautiful part. God used even that painful reaping to transform Jacob. The scheming, manipulative young man who ran from home became a patient, hard-working, faithful husband and father. The years with Laban were hard, but they refined him. They taught him perseverance. They taught him the cost of deception. They humbled him. Sometimes God allows us to experience the consequences of our own sin, not to destroy us, but to remake us. The very thing that feels like punishment can be the tool of our transformation. Second, we see God's incredible faithfulness even to imperfect people. Jacob didn't deserve God's blessing. He was a liar and a cheat. But God had chosen him, called him, and made promises to him. And God doesn't break his promises. Throughout the 20 years with Laban, God was with Jacob. When Laban tried to cheat him, God prospered him anyway. When Laban changed his wages 10 times, God made sure Jacob still succeeded. When Laban pursued him, God protected him. God's grace isn't dependent on our perfection. If it were, none of us would receive it. God chose to work with Jacob, flaws and all, because that's what grace does. It meets us where we are and transforms us into what we can become. Are you struggling with your own past mistakes? Do you feel like you've messed up too badly for God to use you? Jacob's story says otherwise. God doesn't wait for us to get our lives completely together before He starts working in us and through us. He starts where we are. Third, we see the power of love and sacrifice. Jacob worked 14 years for Rachel, and the Bible says those years seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. That's extraordinary. Love makes sacrifice bearable. Love makes waiting worthwhile. Love transforms hardship into purpose. Jacob could have become bitter during those years, but his love for Rachel sustained him. And there's a beautiful parallel here to Christ's love for us. Just as Jacob worked and waited and paid a costly price for his beloved Rachel, Jesus paid an infinitely greater price for us, His beloved bride, the church. He sacrificed Himself, endured suffering, and paid the ultimate cost because of His love. When we're going through hard times, when we're waiting for God's promises to be fulfilled, when we're laboring in difficult circumstances, we can remember that love makes it all worthwhile. Whether it's our love for God, our love for family, or receiving God's love for us, love changes everything. Fourth, we learn that God sees injustice and eventually brings vindication. 4 years, Laban exploited Jacob. He took advantage of him, cheated him, moved the goalposts constantly. Seemed like he was getting away with it. But God was watching. God saw every deception, every manipulation, every act of injustice. And in the end, God made sure Jacob prospered despite Laban's schemes. He turned the tables. The exploiter lost out, and the exploited was blessed. If you're being treated unfairly right now, if someone is using you, manipulating you, taking advantage of your kindness or your work, know that God sees. You don't have to take revenge. You don't have to scheme to get even. You can trust God to bring justice in His time. Keep doing what's right. Keep working with integrity. Keep trusting God. He knows how to vindicate His people. He knows how to turn situations around. The same God who prospered Jacob in spite of Laban can prosper you in spite of whoever is opposing you. Fifth, we see that God can work through even the messiest family situations. This story involves deception, favoritism, polygamy, jealousy, exploitation, and manipulation. It's not exactly a model family. Leah was unloved. Rachel was barren. The sisters were in competition. Jacob was trapped in a situation he never wanted. Laban was toxic. The children grew up in dysfunction. It was complicated and painful. And yet, from this messy, broken family came the 12 tribes of Israel. From Leah came Judah, from whose line the Messiah would eventually come. From Rachel came Joseph, who would save his entire family from famine. God's purposes weren't derailed by human dysfunction. He worked through it. Your family might be complicated. Your situation might be messy. Things might not have turned out the way you planned. But God's plan is bigger than your circumstances. He can write straight with crooked lines. He can bring purpose out of pain, beauty out of ashes, and blessing out of brokenness. As Jacob left Laban behind and headed toward his homeland, his journey wasn't over. In fact, the hardest part was still ahead. He would soon face Esau, the brother he had wronged 20 years earlier. He would wrestle with God at Peniel. He would experience loss and grief. His family drama would continue, but he was not the same man who had fled from home 2 decades before. He had been humbled. He had been refined. He had learned patience, perseverance, and dependence on God. The deceiver was being transformed into Israel, a prince with God. The years with Laban weren't wasted. The hardship wasn't random. The injustice wasn't overlooked. It was all part of a larger story, God's story, of taking a broken, scheming man and transforming him into a patriarch through whom all nations would be blessed. And that's the same story God is writing in your life today. So here we are at the end of Jacob and Laban's incredible story. But here's the thing, it's not really the end, is it? Because somewhere in this story you saw yourself. Maybe you're Jacob, working year after year for someone who keeps moving the goalposts. Maybe you're Leah, feeling unloved and unseen. Maybe you're even Laban, and you're starting to realize the damage your manipulation has caused. Wherever you are in this story, God has a word for you today. I am with you. See you. And I will not leave you. 20 years felt like forever to Jacob. But when he looked back, he could see God's hand in every moment. Even the painful ones. Even the years that felt wasted. Even the deceptions that broke his heart. God was shaping him, refining him, preparing him for what was ahead. And God is doing the same for you right now. Your 14 years of waiting. They're not wasted. Your Laban. God sees what they're doing. Your heartbreak. God is using it to transform you into the person He's called you to be. The story isn't over yet. And the God who brought Jacob through will bring you through too. Now here's what I need you to do. If this message encouraged your heart today, smash that like button right now. Share this video with someone who's in their own Laban season. Someone who needs to know that God sees them and hasn't forgotten them. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next powerful biblical story that could change your life. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's the biggest lesson you're taking from Jacob and Laban's story? I read every single comment, and I'd love to hear how God is speaking to you through this ancient but timeless truth. And remember, your current chapter is not your final chapter. God is writing a story of redemption in your life. And the best is yet to come. Until next time, keep the faith, keep trusting the process, and keep believing that the God of Jacob is your God too. I'll see you in the next video. God bless you.